but Monday.com just took care of all of the management.
And beginning to print with the dirt. We have to perfect this technology.
Help them succeed in keeping it safe. Democrats and Republicans.
A number of analysts have talked about the strategic importance in a military sense if eventually China were able to use the port of Gwadar as a military base.
You know, no one would be surprised if China did use it in that way. I don't think in the short term, like it is set up in Djibouti, where it has a permanent base. I think it's more likely to use it as almost like a sort of forward-based resupply option, something it can use when it wants to.
Other projects like building Pakistan's largest airport in Gwadar and 2 special economic zones have been delayed. A 19-kilometer highway linking the port with the Makran Coastal Highway in Balochistan is under construction too.
Most of the people who live there and work there already are fishermen. They rely on access to the sea. The way that the express highway from the port was originally proposed would have cut off their sea access, and so that was a real point of contention with the community. There have been some proposals to allow them an underpass. It's still a little bit unclear how that is finally going to be resolved.
Even if those projects are eventually built, there are serious questions about who will work there.
There is a problem with manpower, of course, in Gwadar. It's a very small city, and so one proposal has been, well, we'll just ship Chinese workers in from China and build lots of fancy housing for them.
The first Chinese-built community in Pakistan, a $500 million development spanning over 10 million square feet, with over 60% open spaces.
That kind of proposal is what makes a lot of the Pakistan
with a presidential campaign.
Interesting. We're waiting for the next delegation to come in now.
The Chief Justice and Associate Justices of the Supreme Court.
Okay, the Supreme Court is coming in now, led by Chief Justice John Roberts. I have a soft spot in my heart, as you know, for this, because I got to work up there for 1 year. It's a special institution there, so they're coming as well, which is an important moment. As you know, Rick, we had one moment under President Obama that was not so pleasant, actually, with Justice Alito, when President Obama took on a decision, Citizens United, as I recall, in front of them, and Justice Alito was seen to be mouthing pretty directly that that's wrong.
Yeah, when you take on Supreme Court justices who aren't controlled by the vagaries of elections during a State of the Union, you really got to know that you're causing some trouble. And of course, as you point out, David, Justice Alito didn't really particularly cotton to that, and thank goodness we didn't have any, interpreters reading his lips that night.
That's exactly right. And I must say, it won't come as a surprise to you. In my experience, Supreme Court justices are not used to having people disagree with them.
No, not in public.
They're being told yes, sir. Basically.
I would point out one thing. Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin are sitting over on the Republican side tonight. Our new independent senator from Arizona is sitting with Mitt Romney and Todd Young. So a couple of her buddies who she's done quite a bit of legislation with, and that may be sort of sending a shiver up the majority leader's spine in the Senate, because that probably is an indication of things to come this cycle.
Well, I wonder about that, Gene. That's an interesting suggestion, particularly as I come back to the debt ceiling, because that's so much on people's minds as we come up to probably a deadline sometime this summer, because you really do damage to American financial institutions, to the economy overall. But on the one hand, it sends shivers down their spine. On the other hand, the possibility of some sort of a moderate coalition of a Joe Manchin, Sinema, Mitt Romney might be the way through also to get through.
It might, and you talked to Joe Manchin about this very issue, and it's really fascinating, what he is proposing to try to bring these moderate coalitions together to address this very important issue. This is something that, the American public would expect that our U.S. Congress would do. You wouldn't let us default. That's what Manchin is trying to get to. But the question is going to be, is there the support? Is there enough moderates there to do that?
The applause you're hearing, and we're seeing actually on the screen, is Dr. Jill Biden, the First Lady, coming in and giving a peck on the cheek to the second gentleman. Yes, the second gentleman, exactly. I have to get my numbers right here. Exactly. So, Maria, as we talk about the possibility of perhaps a moderate coalition, is that something the White House would be intrigued by?
Well, I think so. You saw President Biden last year spend a considerable amount of time with Joe Manchin, right, where we always had the cameras running in. Joe Manchin's head to the White House as well. And I think the president in his heart is a moderate as well, right? He's governed that way for a long time, and when he was in the Senate and both as vice president and even now.
And now, as you probably heard there, we now have the cabinet coming in to the chamber. We're proceeding down the aisle, some shaking of hands there, some greeting of the cabinet, and led by Secretary of State Tony Blinken, because that is the first cabinet position, as I recall. It was the first section of government created was the State Department. And so they're coming down now to take their seats as we wait for President Biden's address, which should come within the next 5-10 minutes, we would expect. So I wonder, Rick, coming from, as you do, from sort of the Republican side, is Joe Manchin more powerful now after the election in November or less?
Well, look, I mean, less in the terms of just his influence to shape legislation because they desperately needed his vote. But the reality is only having one extra vote in the Senate really doesn't matter because at any given time, there are 2 or 3 other senators who are willing to join the coalition of the willing and frankly, betray the leadership to get something done. And so I think he continues to be incredibly influential, and he's running for re-election this year. So you know he's going to want to, have the spotlight on him and look like he's trying to get something done. So I think he's one to watch. I would also point out there is one cabinet member missing, and that happens to be the newly resigned Labor Secretary, Marty Walsh, who I guess is both in a undisclosed location that may actually be a doghouse. So we'll be missing Marty on his last day of work.
Yeah, we should be clear about that. The report is that he's actually going to take over representing the NHL Players Association, right?
Correct.
As a labor negotiator, he'd be pretty good at that. We're watching here on TV now Gina Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, come down and greet people as the members of the cabinet continue to process in. So Jeannie, coming back to you and Joe Manchin, the Democratic senator from West Virginia. Will he be a Democrat in the next election?
That is the big question. As Rick is telling us, he's sitting with the Republicans tonight. He's got to make Chuck Schumer's blood boil. But, Joe Manchin has long said he will remain a Democrat. He does have a really tough re-election fight ahead of him this year. The Democrats have a really, really awful map in 24, and he is part of that map. They're defending an enormous number of seats. And so, if he was to go, imagine the shakeup in the Senate. They've already lost Kristen Sinema. But I would just say on the issue of the cabinet, a remarkably stable cabinet for Joe Biden. While we have now presumably lost Marty Walsh, this is a cabinet that 2 years in has remained remarkably stable because we usually see turnover much more quickly.
I'm so glad you made that point because I was going to go to the broader issue with Mario Parker about the White House staff because remarkably stable cabinet. We'll see what happens in the coming days. But there are some big changes coming up at the White House. In fact, I think this is Jeff Zients' first appearance probably as Chief of Staff.
Yes, Ron Klain just recently left the White House as well. The president has notoriously had just this very insular network, right? He's got these trusted advisors that have been around him since the 1980s, who he's comfortable with as well. So it'll be interesting to see now as we enter this period of a bit of turnover here, how the White House message shifts as well as we look toward 2024.
Well, I wonder about that, Rick, and this is projecting, obviously, on my part about what's going on. As we've said, whether you agree with it or not, the Biden administration got a lot through Congress in the last Congress, a lot of legislation, particularly considering how narrowly divided the Congress was. Now we turn perhaps into an execution phase where they have to implement it. And the difference between Ron Klain and Jeff Zients, some people have suggested that Jeff Zients is the ultimate executioner. He's the one who came in and sort of saved Obamacare, that website that was a disaster when they first had it.
Right, yeah. That is the reason I think he's the Chief of Staff, because it's certainly not because he knows how to run presidential campaigns and he may be in a presidential cycle. So they've been talking in the White House about the theme of the speech being job left, still there's jobs to do. And that is going to be what resonates with the new Chief of Staff, because they did pass an enormous amount of legislation all about the $1 trillion in infrastructure spending and on clean energy. And he's got 2 years to make good on that. And you've seen the president really commit himself to traveling around the country in advance of this speech. And as Mario pointed out earlier, on his way out tomorrow to do the same thing, talking about these projects in the states, launching these projects, showing the American people that that legislation is actually shovel-ready projects are getting done and that he's having a real impact on jobs and the economy.
And just we're watching on TV now, the outgoing leadership of the Democrats in the House. That's Nancy Pelosi, the former Speaker of the House, and Steny Hoyer, the majority leader in the House of Representatives. And we saw just briefly a moment ago, Mark Milley, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, go down onto the floor. But I'm curious, Jeannie, as you look at it, about the possibility, we don't know what's going to have the possibility of another run for Joe Biden for president. How much of his position going into 2024 would be determined exactly what we're talking about, which is we got the legislation through. It's nice to talk about that, but until you actually see the boots on the ground, the shovels on the ground, you don't get any credit for it. Actually, executing on that might give more credit than they're getting right now. As we talked about, they're not getting a lot of credit at the moment.
That's right, because all the American people know at this point is you spent $1.7 trillion on an infrastructure bill, but my bridge next door is still broken down. I don't have broadband. So the execution phase is going to be critical. The reality is a lot of that won't get done in 2 years, but they've got to show that they are making progress on that and show the American public there are real benefits to this spending. We are not just spending and driving up the debt. We are creating jobs. We are fixing your neighborhoods, your roads. I live in New York. You do too, David. We know we need some new infrastructure there across the country. He's got to show on the ground that that's really paying off. And so that's going to be incredibly important for this Chief of Staff and this president.
Potholes on 57th Street. Just get that done. I know, exactly right. We're wrecking our cars.
United States.
And here we have the announcement of the President of the United States, Joe Biden, coming down the aisle, being escorted. Shaking hands there is the First Lady, Joe Biden, up in the balcony. He'll be shaking a few hands on the way down here. This will probably take a few minutes to take place. Big smile on his face, obviously, as we watch the president proceed. So Mario, to come back to you a bit here, we have not just the president going to Madison tomorrow. We've got, I would call it a blitz around the country with the cabinet going everywhere. How are they picking where they're going?
Well, if you look at it, you look at the map, right? So I think he'll be going to Pennsylvania later in the week. Vice President Harris will be on the road. They're all fanning out to some of these hot spots. A couple of things, right? So not only to the battleground states, but also, and I think Jeannie kind of hit on this point with Manchin's tough re-election as well, Democrats just haven't done well with rural voters. And so you're seeing some of those cabinet members go to places that are red states, but also to make entreaties with these rural voters that Democrats have left behind as well.
So as the president continues to make his way down that aisle, it is taking him a little bit of time to do it. The remarks are out. We have a draft of the remarks. And the one thing I think, Rick, we know for sure, at least I think I can predict, he's going to say the State of the Union is strong. That tends to be what presidents say.
It is, but he's got to be careful because the people he's talking to, the American public, aren't buying that. And so he can't look disconnected on the very first sentence of this speech. So I suspect the writers and he have worked very hard to craft some version of that doesn't make people think that he's out of touch.
Gee, I have to say, and you be a student of this, as I said, a political science professor, there is the substance of this as a positive. There's also the theater of it. And the theater counts. When you're a leader, and particularly when you're the leader of the United States, talking to, as you say, 38, 39 million people, looking for the theater. What, if you were advising the president, what would you try to do on the theater of it to convey the right message?
You know, I would just hope this does not become a laundry list. I would hope he hits on big themes and stays away from the laundry list. I fear I may be wrong. And on this issue of the State of the Union is strong, I was just listening to Gerald Ford, an old tape in his State of the Union where he said the State of the Union's not so good. And I was struck by the fact that you seldom hear presidents in the modern era say that. We won't hear Biden say it tonight, but it really was a reflection of the time.
But he was from Michigan. You know,
your home state.
Prone to honesty.
Prone to honesty. A good Midwesterner.
That's exactly right. So what has the president done to prepare for this, Mario?
Well, he was in Camp David all weekend, all the way up until late yesterday, just practicing his speech from what we understand. He's been looking forward to it. This is his test run for 2024, right? He has to figure out a way to break through and get credit for those accomplishments that Americans feel that they aren't seeing from him.
We just saw the president shake hands with the Chief Justice of the United States. He's working his way down the Supreme Court of the United States now. He's followed by Steve Scalise there, also Hakeem Jeffries, leadership in the House. And as it usually happens here, he wants to stop and talk to everybody. Everybody wants to sort of shake his hand. I suspect Republican or Democrat, right, Jeannie?
Oh, absolutely. You want to shake the president's hand. This is a big moment for our members of Congress, our senators, our representatives. This is once a year they're gathered with their colleagues, and now, of course, they all bring guests, which is sort of a new development where not only the president and the First Lady bring guests, but the senators and representatives as well. But certainly a really important and historic moment for all of them.
I'm so glad you raised that, Rick. What is it with the guests? I don't remember this before. I mean, I remember, didn't Ronald Reagan first have somebody?
Yeah, Ronald Reagan first had some of the heroes that he pointed out in his speech.
Every single person gets to bring a guest or two?
The entire balcony of the House of Representatives are guests who all should actually have their story told, I guess. But one thing I would note, Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker, wanted to give the President a warm welcome. And from what I can tell, all the Republican House members are standing and applauding. So, so far, so good for the decorum of the House of Representatives.
As is the Speaker of the House applauding there as the President shakes hands first with the Vice President, Kamala Harris, and now with the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. And now he steps to the podium. Normally there's a fair amount of applause and back and forth before he actually gets to start his remarks, but we're getting closer to it, I think it's fair to say. It's a special moment for the country and certainly for this man, Joe Biden. A little message there for Kevin McCarthy, the Speaker of the House.
Hello, hello, hello.
I think the President now is trying to say something.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Members of Congress, I have the high privilege and distinct honor to present to you the President of the United States.
And quite an accolade. And quite an accolade. And again, Rick made a very important point. Everybody's standing, at least for this part.
Thank you. You can smile. It's okay. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, please. Mr. Speaker, Madam Vice President, our First Lady and Second Gentleman, good to see you guys up there. Members of Congress. By the way, Chief Justice, I may need a court order. She gets to go to the game tomorrow, next week. I have to stay home. Got to work something out here. Members of the Cabinet, leaders of our military, Chief Justice, Associate Justice, and retired Justice of the Supreme Court, and to you, my fellow Americans. You know, I start tonight by congratulating the 118th Congress and the new Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy. Speaker, I don't want to ruin your reputation, but I look forward to working with you. And I want to congratulate the new leader of the House Democrats, the first African-American minority leader in history, Hakeem Jeffries. He won in spite of the fact I campaigned for him. Congratulations to the longest-serving leader in the history of the United States Senate, Mitch McConnell. Where are you, Mitch? And congratulations to Chuck Schumer, another term as Senate Minority Leader. I think this time you have a slightly bigger majority, Mr. Leader. You're the Majority Leader. About that much bigger? Yeah, well, I tell you what, I want to give special recognition to someone who I think is going to be considered the greatest speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi. Folks, the story of America is a story of progress and resilience, of always moving forward, of never, ever giving up. It's a story unique among all nations. We're the only country that has emerged from every crisis we've ever entered stronger than we got into it. Look, folks, that's what we're doing again. 2 years ago, the economy was reeling. I stand here tonight after we've created, with the help of many people in this room, 12 million new jobs. More jobs created in 2 years than any president's created in 4 years because of you all, because of the American people. 2 years ago, and 2 years ago, COVID had shut down, our businesses were closed, our schools were robbed of so much, and today, COVID no longer controls our lives. And 2 years ago, democracy faced its greatest threats in the Civil War, and today, though bruised, our democracy remains unbowed and unbroken. As we gather here tonight, we're writing the next chapter in the great American story, a story of progress and resilience. When world leaders ask me to define America, and they do, believe it or not, I can define it in one word, and I mean this: possibilities. We don't think anything is beyond our capacity. Everything is a possibility. You know, we're often told that Democrats and Republicans can't work together. But over the past 2 years, we've proved the cynics and naysayers wrong. Yes, we disagreed plenty. And yes, there were times when Democrats went alone. But time and again, Democrats and Republicans came together to defend a stronger and safer Europe. You came together to pass once in a generation infrastructure law, building bridges connecting our nation and our people. We came together to pass the most significant law ever, helping victims exposed to toxic burn pits. And in fact, it was important. And in fact, I signed over 300 bipartisan pieces of legislation since becoming president, from reauthorizing the Violence Against Women Act, to the Electoral Count Reform Act, the Respect for Marriage Act that protects the right to marry the person you love. And to my Republican friends, if we could work together the last Congress, there's no reason we can't work together and find consensus on important things in this Congress as well. I think, folks, you all are as informed as I am, but I think the people sent us a clear message. Fighting for the sake of fighting, power for the sake of power, conflict for the sake of conflict gets us nowhere. That's always been my vision of our country, and I know it's many of yours. To restore the soul of this nation, to rebuild the backbone of America, America's middle class, and to unite the country. We've been sent here to finish the job, in my view. For decades, the middle class has been hollowed out in more than, and not one administration, but for a long time. Too many good-paying manufacturing jobs moved overseas. Factories closed down. Once thriving cities and towns that many of you represent became shadows of what they used to be. And along the way, something else we lost: pride, our sense of self-worth. I ran for president to fundamentally change things, to make sure our economy works for everyone, so we can all feel that pride in what we do. To build an economy from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down. Because when the middle class does well, the poor have a ladder up, and the wealthy still do very well. We all do well. I know a lot of you always kid me for always quoting my dad, but my dad used to say, Joey, a job's about a lot more than a paycheck. as you really would say this. It's about a lot more than a paycheck. It's about your dignity. It's about respect. It's about being able to look your kid in the eye and say, honey, it's going to be okay, and mean it. Well, folks, so let's look at the results. We're not finished yet by any stretch of the imagination, but unemployment rate is at 3.4%, a 50-year low. A near record unemployment. Near record unemployment for black and Hispanic workers. We've already created, with your help, 800,000 good-paying manufacturing jobs, the fastest growth in 40 years. And where is it written? Where is it written that America can't lead the world in manufacturing? And I don't know where that's written. For too many decades, we imported projects and exported jobs. Now, thanks to what you've all done, we're exporting American products and creating American jobs. Folks, inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up. Additionally, over the last 2 years, a record 10 million Americans applied to start new businesses. 10 million. And by the way, every time someone starts a small business is an act of hope. And Madam Vice President, I want to thank you for leading that effort to ensure that small businesses have access to capital and the historic laws we enacted that are going to just come into being. Standing here last year, I shared with you a story of American genius and possibilities. Semiconductors, small computer chips the size of a fingerprint that power everything from cell phones to automobiles and so much more. These chips were invented in America. Let's get that straight. They were invented in America. We used to make 40% of the world's chips. In the last several decades, we lost our edge. We're down to only producing 10%. We all saw what happened during the pandemic when chip factories shut down overseas. Today's automobiles need 3,000 chips each of those automobiles. But American automobiles couldn't make enough cars because there weren't enough chips. Car prices went up, people got laid off, so did everything from refrigerators to cell phones. We can never let that happen again. That's why we came together to pass the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act. Folks, I know I've been criticized for saying this, but I'm not changing my view. We're going to make sure the supply chain for America begins in America. The supply chain begins in America. We've already created 800,000 new manufacturing jobs without this law, before the law kicks in. With this new law, we're going to create hundreds of thousands of new jobs across the country. And I mean all across the country, throughout not just the coast, but through the middle of the country as well. That's going to come from companies that have announced more than $300 billion in investment in American manufacturing over the next few years. Outside of Columbus, Ohio, Intel is building semiconductor factories on 1,000 acres. Literally a field of dreams. It's going to create 10,000 jobs, that one investment. 7,000 construction jobs. 3,000 jobs in those factories once they're finished. They call them factories. Jobs paying an average of $130,000 a year, and many do not require a college degree. Jobs. Because we work together, these jobs where people don't have to leave home to search for opportunity. It's just getting started. Think about the new homes, the small businesses, the medium-sized businesses. So much more that's going to be needed to support those 3,000 permanent jobs and the factories that are going to be built. Talk to mayors and governors, Democrats and Republicans, and they'll tell you what this means for their communities. We're seeing these field of dreams transform to the heartland. But to maintain the strongest economy in the world, we need the best infrastructure in the world. And folks, as you all know, we used to be #1 in the world in infrastructure. We've sunk to 13th in the world. The United States of America, 13th in the world in infrastructure, modern infrastructure. But now we're coming back. because we came together and passed a bipartisan infrastructure law, the largest investment in infrastructure since President Eisenhower's interstate highway system. And folks, already we've funded over 20,000 projects, including major airports from Boston to Atlanta to Portland. Projects that are going to put thousands of people to work rebuilding our highways, our bridges, our railroads, our tunnels, ports, airports, clean water, high-speed internet, all across America. Urban, rural, tribal. And folks, we're just getting started. We're just getting started. And I mean it sincerely. I want to thank my Republican friends who voted for the law, and my Republican friends who voted against it as well. But I still get asked to fund the projects in those districts as well. But don't worry. I promised I'd be a president for all Americans. We'll fund these projects. And I'll see you at the groundbreaking. Look, this law will further unite all of America. Projects like Brent Spence Bridge in Kentucky over the Ohio River, built 60 years ago, badly needed repairs, one of the nation's most congested freight routes, carrying $2 billion worth of freight every single day across the Ohio River. And folks, I've been talking about fixing it for decades, but we're really finally going to get it done. Yes. I went there last month with Democrats and Republicans and from both states to deliver a commitment of $1.6 billion for this project. And while I was there, I met a young woman named Sarah, who's here tonight. I don't know where Sarah is. Is she up in the box? I don't know. Sarah, how are you? Well, Sarah, for 30 years, I learned, she told me she'd been a proud member of the Iron Workers Local 44, known as the Cowboys in the Sky. The folks who built Cincinnati's skyline. Sarah said she can't wait to be 10 stories above the Ohio River building that new bridge. God bless her. That's pride. And that's what we're also building. We're building back pride. Look, we're also replacing poisonous lead pipes that go into 10 million homes in America, 400,000 school and child care centers. So every child in America can drink the water instead of having permanent damage to their brain. Look, we're making sure that every community in America has access to affordable high-speed internet. No parent should have to drive by McDonald's parking lot to help them do their homework online with their kids, which thousands were doing across the country. And when we do these projects, and again, I get criticized for this, but I make no excuses for it, we're going to buy American. We're going to buy America. Folks, and it's totally consistent with international trade rules. Buy America has been the law since 1933, but for too long, past administrations, Democrat and Republican, have fought to get around it. Not anymore. Tonight, I'm announcing new standards require all construction materials used in federal infrastructure projects to be made in America. Made in America. I mean it. Lumber, glass, drywall, fiber optic cable. And on my watch, American roads, bridges, and American highways are going to be made with American products as well. Folks, my economic plan is about investing in places and people that have been forgotten. So many of you listening to me tonight, I know you feel it. So many of you felt like you've just simply been forgotten. Amid the economic upheaval of the past 4 decades, too many people have been left behind and treated like they're invisible. Maybe that's you watching from home. Remember the jobs that went away. You remember them, don't you? The folks at home remember them. You wonder whether the path even exists anymore for your children to get ahead without having to move away. Well, that's why I get that. That's why we're building an economy where no one's left behind. Jobs are coming back. Pride is coming back because choices we made in the last several years. You know, this is, in my view, a blue-collar blueprint to rebuild America and make a real difference in your lives at home. For example, too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer, or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you. Are you going to get money to pay for those medical bills? Or are you going to have to sell the house or try to get a second mortgage on it? I get it. I get it. With the Inflation Reduction Act that I signed into law, We're taking on powerful interests to bring healthcare costs down so you can sleep better at night with more security. You know, we pay more for prescription drugs than any nation in the world. Let me say it again. We pay more for prescription drugs than any major nation on earth. For example, 1 in 10 Americans has diabetes. Many of you in this chamber do, and in the audience. But every day, millions need insulin to control their diabetes so they can literally stay alive. Insulin's been around for over 100 years. The guy who invented it didn't even patent it because he wanted it to be available for everyone. It cost the drug companies roughly $10 a vial to make that insulin. Packaging and all, you may get up to $13. But Big Pharma has been unfairly charging people hundreds of dollars, $400 to $500 a month, making record profits. Not anymore. Not anymore. So many things that we did are only now coming to fruition. We said we were doing this, and we said we passed the law to do it, but people didn't know because the law didn't take effect until January 1 of this year. We capped the cost of insulin at $35 a month for seniors on Medicare. People are just finding out. I'm sure you're getting the same calls I'm getting. Look, there are millions of other Americans who do not or are not on Medicare, including 200,000 young people with type 1 diabetes and need this insulin to stay alive. Let's finish the job this time. Let's cap the cost of insulin for everybody at $35.
That center aisle. He delivered it was subduing, I think, especially after the speech we just heard from inside the House chamber. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. But this was definitely a, game on, 2024. We're ready to go to fight with the Democrats. There was no effort toward comedy, unity, bipartisanship whatsoever in this speech. And I think that's probably what you're going to see. She did say something at the end where she said, but this is all about a new generation of Republican leadership. Kind of turned the page on, Donald Trump, who, even though she mentioned she's the youngest governor and Joe Biden's the oldest president, she didn't talk much about how old Donald Trump is and where he stands in that, but he's definitely not the new generation. So, Jeannie, a fight without a doubt, but I didn't hear a lot of fight about policy. It sounded like a fight about culture. It was almost all, at least what I heard, apart from the reference to education that she's going to do in Arkansas, it sounded it was all about what she calls the culture wars.
That's right. And, to me, this was a base play, and it's something that Democrats will welcome. This is somebody who came into the governorship, and what did she do? She banned critical race theory. She banned the use of the term Latinx. She has talked about repealing COVID measures. It is all a play for the base, and this is something that Democrats would welcome in 2024. She has an awfully compelling story. She's the youngest governor, the first female governor of Arkansas. She has had a terrible health issue recently, but the speech itself is something that Democrats will welcome. It's a hard speech to give, but it sets up for them, as she talks about it, this sort of crazy versus normal. That's exactly what Joe Biden says, and the shoe is on the other foot. So it's stunning to hear it reversed. And, I think they are both campaign speeches the way I hear them.
Fascinating. So, Peggy, let me come to you because I think of you as really focused on economics and the economy and economic regulation in Washington. I'm not sure there's a lot to engage with for people who are concerned about the economy or business in what Sarah Huckabee Sanders had to say, other than perhaps, again, the education aspect.
Well, yes, it was specific, as Rick said, on education. I will say on the recovery being destroyed, I think there's some data that we've covered at Bloomberg that would put that into question. I mean, just on Friday, we saw a jobs report that was blockbuster in terms of 517,000 jobs created in January, unemployment at 3.4%. So I don't know how you fight that economic policy that's going on right now, although we do have a tough road ahead. The one other thing I will say is she opened with border policy. That is something that, Republicans are hitting hard, but also that the Biden administration doesn't have a clear policy answer to either.
Yeah, it's fascinating. We'll have to come back to border at some point, Rick. We're going to have to deal with
look, I mean, I think that was the low point of the Biden speech tonight. It got the worst reaction. He got off script. He didn't really deliver what I would call a comprehensive border policy. And he's not connecting the massive fentanyl increase in deaths in America to the fact that most, if not all, that fentanyl is coming across our southern border. He would be well advised to take a look and figure out how drug policy intersects with border policy and start to talk intelligently about what his administration is doing in that regard.
Yeah, so briefly, something we should cover a little bit more because actually the data show the vast majority country does not come with illegal immigrants. It comes through legal immigration, people smuggling it.
That's right. That's right. And the president needs to make that case clearly, and it's definitely something that's got to be discussed more.
Lost, no question about it. Thank you so much. It's really been a great evening with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano, and also Peggy Collins, covering the State of the Union address from President Joe Biden and then the response from Sarah Huckabee Sanders. And that does it for our coverage of the State of the Union address on Bloomberg Television and Radio. Coming up next, global coverage of the markets. This is Bloomberg.
For parents and anyone out there who still doesn't quite understand, what exactly are kids doing on Roblox?
Kids on Roblox aren't just playing, they're learning, they're hanging out together. When they can't be together in real life, they're hanging out on Roblox. They could be playing hide and go seek, they could be pretending they're running a store or a pizza parlor, they could be making the next big game or adventure. So it's really a wide range of things, and it involves doing things together, pretending you're together.
Everybody's talking about the metaverse as something that's going to happen in the future, but there's an argument to be made that Roblox has already built a metaverse. What do you think?
I think we've started. There's still so much innovation to be done, and there's so much invention to be done in this category that it's mind-boggling.
When U.S. jobs numbers are released, Bloomberg brings you crucial data at terminal speed and instant expert analysis. Nobody covers jobs day like Bloomberg. From the world of politics to the world of business, Balance of Power with David Weston brings you news, analysis, and insight from and about politics power players. Balance of Power, weekdays on Bloomberg.
You worked 10 feet away from Andy Jassy in the early days. Tell us something about the Amazon CEO that no one knows but you.
You're going to get me in trouble, aren't you? I grew up in Seattle, and Andy, coming from New York, has this fascination I don't understand with New York sports teams. So I've had to endure that for a lot of years. New Yorkers, yeah. So what are you going to do? Although he's I think come to adopt some of the Seattle teams, particularly the new hockey team, the Kraken here.
As he should.
As he should, exactly.
So how do you expect Andy will be different from Jeff, or how has Andy already been different from Jeff?
Well, I think we're all different as leaders. I think it's all important that it's important that we all bring our own stamp to it and operate within ourselves. I don't think I would be a very good Andy. I don't want to presume, but I would assume that Andy wouldn't be a great Jeff, because Jeff's Jeff, Andy's Andy, and I'm me. So I think that Andy will certainly bring a great depth of experience from AWS, which is one important part of the business, and having operated that business for so long, and I expect that'll also give him an opportunity, although he was involved in other parts of Amazon, certainly for a number of years, will be able to bring a fresh perspective to the whole company, just as I hope to bring to AWS. And I think that fresh perspective is often helpful. I think just the mere act of change is useful for the business, for customers, for employees, and just to shake things up a little bit. So I think just a fresh perspective.
How will you be different from Andy?
Well, I think that the world around us is changing so much that we're going to have to be different. It doesn't matter what we did yesterday. And right after I joined, we actually added 2 new leadership principles, which is very exciting. One's around striving to be Earth's best employer, and the second around focusing on the fact that success and scale bring broad responsibility. And those are things about which I personally am very passionate. And so I really personally look forward to digging in and helping the company to figure out what are those things that we have to figure out, where can we innovate to be Earth's best employer, and then also to figure out externally what can we do to really be great citizens of our local communities, to be great citizens of our national communities, and to be great citizens of the global community. And I care a lot about those things, as a lot of other people do here, but I plan to put a good amount of energy and time and focus and hopefully help Amazon innovate in all of those areas.
How closely do you work with Andy day to day? Does he regularly weigh in on AWS decisions or not?
Well, he's got a pretty broad scope of things to worry about now, so he's got a pretty intense day job, I believe. So he's really focused across the company, as you would expect him to be. But that being said, obviously AWS remains an important part of Amazon, and so we touch base regularly, be it in person or via email, just on the most important things going on in the business.
Does Jeff ever weigh in on AWS decisions?
Yes, I mean, really from the beginning. Jeff was involved at the very, very beginning at some of the most fundamental decisions. How do you price EC2? What do you name S3? What does the detail page look like? Obviously, over time, the business grew, and but Jeff was always available when we needed him, and I certainly anticipate that'll be the same going forward.
So, is he still available now? And what do you understand that Jeff's priorities are?
Sure. Well, I'll let Jeff speak to his own priorities, but certainly.
Euros, the market was looking for 400.
You worked 10 feet away from Andy Jassy in the early days. Tell us something about the Amazon CEO that no one knows but you.
You're going to get me in trouble, aren't you? I grew up in Seattle, and Andy, coming from New York, has this fascination I don't understand with New York sports teams. So I've had to endure that for a lot of years. New Yorkers, yeah. So what are you going to do? Although he's I think come to adopt some of the Seattle teams, particularly the new hockey team, the Kraken here.
As he should.
As he should, exactly.
So how do you expect Andy will be different from Jeff, or how has Andy already been different from Jeff?
Well, I think we're all different as leaders. I think it's important that we all bring our own stamp to it and operate within ourselves. I don't think I would be a very good Andy. I don't want to presume, but I would assume that Andy wouldn't be a great Jeff, because Jeff's Jeff, Andy's Andy, and I'm me. So I think that Andy will certainly bring a great depth of experience from AWS, which is one important part of the business, and having operated that business for so long, and I expect that'll also give him an opportunity, although he was involved in other parts of Amazon certainly for a number of years, will be able to bring a fresh perspective to the whole company, just as I hope to bring to AWS. And I think that fresh perspective is often helpful. I think just the mere act of change is useful for the business, for customers, for employees, and just to shake things up a little bit. So I think just a fresh perspective.
How will you be different from Andy?
Well, I think that the world around us is changing so much that we're going to have to be different. It doesn't matter what we did yesterday. And right after I joined, we actually added 2 new leadership principles, which is very exciting. One's around striving to be Earth's best employer, and the second around focusing on the fact that success and scale bring broad responsibility. And those are things about which I personally am very passionate. And so I really personally look forward to digging in and helping the company to figure out what are those things that we have to figure out, where can we innovate to be Earth's best employer, and then also to figure out externally what can we do to really be great citizens of our local communities, to be great citizens of our national communities, and to be great citizens of the global community. And I care a lot about those things, as a lot of other people do here, but I plan to put a good amount of energy and time and focus and hopefully help Amazon innovate in all of those areas.
How closely do you work with Andy day to day? Does he, regularly weigh in on AWS decisions or not?
Well, he's got a pretty broad scope of things to worry about now, so he's got a pretty intense day job, I believe. So he's really focused across the company as you would expect him to be. But that being said, obviously AWS remains an important part of Amazon, and so we touch base regularly, be it in person or via email, just on the most important things going on in the business.
Does Jeff ever weigh in on AWS decisions?
Yes, I mean, really from the beginning. Jeff was involved at the very, very beginning at some of the most fundamental decisions. How do you price EC2? What do you name S3? What does the detail page look like? Obviously, over time, the business grew, and but Jeff was always available when we needed him, and I certainly anticipate that'll be the same going forward.
So is he still available now? And what do you understand that Jeff's priorities are?
Sure. Well, I'll let Jeff speak to his own priorities, but certainly Jeff has been available when, for example, we've been doing our annual planning cycle, as many companies have, and it's been great to have Jeff weigh in on really where we're heading for the next year and beyond, and to just make sure it's easy to get focused on the details of the business, and it's great to have multiple people who can help you pick your eyes up a little bit.
Now, you joined AWS in the middle of a pandemic. You came back to AWS in the middle of a pandemic. That's hopefully moving into the rearview mirror. Moderna is one of AWS's biggest customers. If it weren't for the cloud, if it weren't for AWS, would we have had a vaccine as quickly as we did?
I've got to tell you, Emily, it's been an absolute privilege for us to work with Moderna, because what they're doing obviously is literally life-saving, and they've been so innovative and so creative. So Moderna took a drug development process to get to a vaccine candidate. That process would typically have taken them 20 months. And doing that on AWS in conjunction with all the innovation on their side, reduced that 20 months to 42 days. 42 days to get the vaccine candidate, the mRNA vaccine candidate for COVID-19. And that was really running multiple parts of Moderna on AWS. So if you look at the drug design part, they had their drug design studio running on AWS, all the way to manufacturing with the new digitized manufacturing that they call their digital manufacturing platform. So it's really end-to-end, and the ability to use massive amounts of resources and to pick the exact type of service and capability for each part of the job, and to really bring the full set of resources to bear. In addition to not having to focus on the IT and the infrastructure and the technology, and rather letting Moderna focus on the all-important job of drug discovery. So working in partnership, it was just magnificent to see what they accomplished.
Since you joined AWS, a number of longtime AWS leaders have moved on to Microsoft, to Stripe, to Tableau. Does that concern you?
Well, actually, retention has been very good. If you mentioned the senior leaders, if you look at the VP plus ranks, the VP and above ranks at Amazon, the average tenure is over a decade, over 10 years. So that's actually very, very strong retention. So of course, you're always going to have some level of people coming and people going, and at the end of the day, that's actually healthy for the business. You want new perspectives to come in, of course, in the right proportion.
Amazon has opened an investigation after 550 employees supported a petition claiming a culture of discrimination, harassment, bullying, and bias. What's the status of this?
Well, we are incredibly focused, and I personally believe it's incredibly important to really have a very diverse, inclusive, and equitable environment. And we're going to make sure that whatever it takes, that we've got that. So we believe that we're really doing a lot of things to deliver on that. And we've got a lot of innovative efforts around bringing in a diverse workforce, which we have to have, both because we're going to serve our customers best. They're diverse. We have to match that diversity. And also, I just believe it's our responsibility and it's the right thing to do. Anytime there is any possibility that things are not, something has not gone the way we want it to, we're going to investigate it thoroughly. That's what we're in the middle of doing in this case, and we'll make sure that we're operating in a way that's consistent with our values, and that's always the only goal.
If you could rewind to the early 2000s, the earliest days of AWS, is there anything you would have done differently to build an inclusive culture, to start with a more inclusive culture, to make sure that it didn't become a boys' club?
Well, I don't think that's what we have. I think that we do have a really fun, exciting, innovation-led, and inclusive culture. And that being said, these are hard problems. I think we've done a lot, but we are nowhere close to where we need to be. We're going to be restless and dissatisfied with our progress on DE&I, just as we are with every other part of our business.
Mark Zuckerberg is making a big bet on the metaverse. How big do you think it's going to be?
It's such an interesting sense. The metaverse is real.
AWS has the biggest trove of sensitive corporate data in the world. I'm curious how you think about the balance between data and privacy and freedom and civil liberties in the modern era. I mean, there are governments, there are nation states around the world that want that information. Hackers and criminals want that information.
Well, we're very clear to start with that our first job is security. We often say security is job zero. It was on the first page of our operating plan pretty much every year that I can remember.
But what about when governments request that information,
So,
subpoena that information?
Sure. Well, we are very clear that our customers' data is their data. So the data belongs to our customers, and not everybody operates that way. We are not going to look at customers' data. We are not going to compete against our customers using their data. Their data is their data. And furthermore, we have all sorts of architectural best practices that our customers should be and are using for any sensitive data. And so a lot of that really relies around encryption. And so we built a lot of different encryption capabilities so that any sensitive data, which could leak for any reason, be it to a government, be it to a hacker, be it to anyone else, any form of security breach, that it's encrypted and useless to anybody else. Given the broad array of encryption solutions that we provide, it's actually very doable and powerful for our customers to safeguard their data that way.
Mark Zuckerberg is making a big bet on the metaverse. Is AWS going to have a role in the metaverse?
I think AWS already has a big role in the metaverse. So I think the cloud enables the metaverse. So if you think about all of the compute capacity, all of the storage, all of the machine learning which is required to create compelling and delightful end user experiences in the metaverse, a lot of that is already today running on AWS. So if you take Epic Games, for example, so Epic runs Fortnite, massively popular game, 350 million users worldwide, and Epic runs almost everything on AWS, from the back-end servers to the analytics and everything in between. So I think that's a great example of the metaverse at work, and all that's happening today on AWS. And we anticipate that's only going to grow really rapidly in the future.
How big do you think it's going to be?
Such an interesting sentence. The metaverse is real, and yet it's virtual at the same time. I think that if we continue to do what we've always done, which is to provide a technology platform that allows organizations to transform, then these gaming and entertainment and social media and other companies will be able to do what they do best, which is to focus on innovating on behalf of their end users. And I think that the metaverse and many other areas will be rich with invention.
So this next conversation will happen in the spheres, in the metaverse. That's where we'll next meet.
That could be. I'll meet you in the metaverse.
All right, see you there. Now, I know that climate change, and stopping climate change, and your data center footprint is a big passion of yours. How fast will Amazon's data centers get to carbon neutral?
Amazon is already the largest purchaser of renewable energy in the world. And we intend to be 100% renewable energy by the year 2025. We'd originally said 2030. We actually accelerated that by 5 years to 2025. And that's part of our broader climate pledge that Amazon created, and to which we've now gotten 200 other organizations to sign on to. And the climate pledge is to be net zero carbon by 2040, 10 years ahead of the Paris Accord target. Yeah. So we know how to do some of that. Other part are going to require invention, but we really look forward to it, and I think it's one of the most important things we can do for our generation.
Amazon counts some of the biggest oil and gas producers as its customers. Isn't that a contradiction? Should you be kicking them off your platforms?
Those customers are trying to get to sustainable business models which rely on new energy sources. And so many of those customers are figuring out how do they get to wind, how do they get to solar, how do they get into batteries, all new business models relying on renewable energy. And I think rather than abandoning them and having them maybe dig in more on fossil fuels, if we can enable them to move faster, to be more innovative, and to be more agile in figuring out new business models, new technical solutions, experimenting, failing fast, and moving on to the next idea, then the whole world will get to the renewable energy solutions that we need.
At this year's reInvent conference, it'll be the first time that Andy Jassy is not giving the keynote. Mm-hmm. You will be. Give us a preview. What can we expect to hear? I think
we're going to have a lot of really exciting announcements. So I think across our service portfolio, you'll see that. We have a lot of exciting partner announcements. The partner ecosystem still remains, to this day, so important to what AWS is doing, and we have some great announcements lined up for that. And then I think people are going to want to see that we're making it easier and easier for them to consume the cloud and to work with AWS. And so we're going to continue to, in addition to building more powerful basic capabilities, we're going to continue to make it easier and easier in a variety of ways to interact with AWS.
Adam Selipsky, CEO of AWS, thank you so much for joining us.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials, find people, and analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit Search Go to find answers now.
All right, so here we are in front of the elephants.
Since this very first YouTube video was uploaded 16 years ago, the world's most popular video network has exploded to more than 2 billion users in the farthest corners of the planet, now raking in billions of dollars every year. It's evolved a long way from cat videos to become a one-click journey to the center of the zeitgeist, pop culture, and kid culture, amplifying some of the brightest and sometimes darkest traits in all of us. While YouTube has elevated a generation of creators and educated and entertained generations of viewers, it's fought misinformation, terrorism, racism, and violence many clicks along the way. Lately, YouTube's biggest battles are focused on eliminating COVID and vaccine misinformation and keeping the platform safe for kids and teens. On this edition of Bloomberg Studio 1.0, we rewind to talk about where YouTube has been and fast forward to where it's going next with one of the longest tenured employees and women at Google, the CEO of YouTube, Susan Wojcicki.
It's been 5 years since we last talked on camera, and we have a new president. We are weathering a pandemic. The most watched video on YouTube is
Baby Shark.
Baby Shark. So a lot's changed since 2016. How do you feel about YouTube 2021 versus 2016?
I feel good about it. It's definitely been a while, and in technology, things move so quickly. So a lot of things have changed since 2016. And I mean, overall, I've been really pleased that we've continued to grow and grow our ecosystem of creators. We've invested a lot in responsibility, and that's been a really big focus for us. And you know, we've weathered through a pandemic and a lot of hard challenges, but overall, I'm feeling really good.
You've been at Google for 20 plus years, going all the way back to Larry and Sergey in the garage. You've been the CEO of YouTube for 7+ years. How has your job changed in that time?
Since I joined being the CEO of YouTube, I would say one of the biggest things that has changed certainly has just been maybe the recognition of the importance of digital video. So when I first joined, actually a lot of people would say, oh, like, why did you join? I was running ads beforehand, and that's been the main way Google generates revenue. And so a lot of people said, like, why did you leave that and go to YouTube? But I always believed in digital video. And I believe that now we see that the world also believes. We've seen a lot of adoption of digital video and the benefits that can have.
You've championed this diversification strategy at YouTube since you started. What's working and what's not working?
Well, our main way of generating revenue is from advertising. But we also have really grown our subscription revenue. And that has been really, really important for many different reasons. So that has enabled our users to have an experience where they can have music, YouTube Music, and Premium. We just announced the 50 million subscribers that we were really excited about. But we also see other ways that our creators generate revenue. So our creators, for example, generate revenue with channel subscriptions. They may sell merchandise. We also have things like digital goods, so like Super Chat, Super Thanks. And so we've basically diversified the number of ways that our ecosystem is generating revenue.
The original tagline for YouTube was broadcast yourself, and that concept has exploded. You have ordinary people in the spotlight. When they grow up, they want to be an influencer. They want to be a YouTube star or a YouTube creator. What do you see as the future of the creator economy?
I see a lot of possibility with the creator economy, and because I see that many people have a lot of interest and they have a lot to offer, and beforehand they wouldn't have been able to have shared that with the world. And so there's so many people, depending upon what their talent or their interest is, whether it's a sport or cooking or gaming or hairstyles that people have come out and really been able to share that and create a lot of jobs. So we actually see like we actually saw a 35% increase in the number of creators that are generating six-figure income out of YouTube. And in the last year. And so that's just an example of like how the creator economy is continuing to grow.
Well, and for years, YouTube was the only company that actually paid creators, but now a lot of companies are paying creators. You know, Facebook and Instagram, Snap, TikTok. How do you see that competition playing out? Who wins?
Well, it is a competitive landscape, and in general, competition's good. It makes everyone work harder, and that's good. I mean, we look at creators and we say they're going to come to us if we do the best job. And creators come to us looking basically for fame and fortune. Like, how can I have a skill or I have a talent, something I want to share with the world, like, and YouTube can help that be known, can help them provide that fame, but also we can generate revenue for them. And so as long as we're doing a good job of that, creators are going to come to us. If we start to fail, then they're going to leave us and they're going to go to another platform. And so we just need to work really hard to make sure that we deliver that for our creators.
A year ago during the Black Lives Matter protest, YouTube made big commitments to Black creators in particular. What's been the progress there? And how do you see YouTube, the potential for YouTube to be used as a tool for social justice?
Well, so we'd made an announcement that we were going to do a $100 million Black Voices Fund. And so we're continuing to develop content there. But one of the other things, and I think there's been a lot of great content that's come out, and we'll certainly see more. But you know, because YouTube doesn't have any gatekeepers, like you can just post and become a creator, you know, we have seen a lot of people of different backgrounds and underrepresented backgrounds become creators and have audiences. We never really measured it beforehand because we didn't have a way. And so one of the things that we've done is we've enabled creators to now tell us what backgrounds they affiliate with, so we can have a better understanding of how they're doing on our platform.
Let's talk about YouTube Shorts. It seems to be a top priority.
Yeah.
We all know that TikTok is on the rise.
Yeah.
How important are YouTube Shorts to the platform, to the company?
So YouTube Shorts is very important. We see that creators and users want to watch all types of content, long form, short form. It turns out that the first video that was actually ever uploaded to YouTube, Me at the Zoo, was an 18-second video. So it was a short form video. And we have lots of short form videos, and we've had it way before TikTok did. But what we have really been leaning into more is just enabling those to be found, and then a lot of the creation tools. And so bringing a lot more mobile creation is really important for us going forward.
Did you notice that viewing time was being lost to TikTok? Did you see that trend? And do you see TikTok as a sort of existential threat?
I mean, we definitely see many competitors in this space. What we're just focused on are like our own metrics, like do we see our users engaging? Where's our opportunity? And we're always looking around and seeing what our competitors are doing. And if they're doing something that we think would be good for our users and our creators, like, you know, we're also going to look at how we can improve our own economy, creator economy, and what's good for our users.
I think a lot of people, you know, we talk about vaccine hesitancy and they blame social media. They say YouTube's not doing enough.
One of the big things for us is to continue to work with public health experts to get their messages across.
Today's your big day. Are you excited? Mama is tired.
6 feet apart.
You have to feed your creativity. Built this tree house.
You guys ready for the movie?
See what we can do.
At this point, YouTube has become a hub for discovery, for information, for, you know, it satisfies our curiosities, right? That comes with a lot of inspiration, but also with misinformation. When it comes to vaccines, vaccine hesitancy, videos that cause a public health risk, where do you want to see YouTube do better?
We've taken responsibility very seriously. It's been one of my top priorities. So first of all, we want to make sure that if there's information that violates our policies, we came up with 10 different policies around COVID, then if that's a violation of policies, then that's something that we'll remove. We removed over 1 million videos associated with COVID, but we also want to make sure that we're raising up information that we think that come from trusted and authoritative sources. And we've really been able to do that.
I think a lot of people, we talk about vaccine hesitancy and they blame social media. They say YouTube's not doing enough, How do you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, first of all, we're always learning. Just to be fair, we're always thinking about how can we do better. We're looking at the feedback and working with public health experts across the board. And, I think one of the big things for us is to continue to work with public health experts to understand, what are the ways that we can partner with them to get their messages across. And I really believe that is something that's really changed is the evolution of bringing creators, musicians, experts talking about public health. We never would have seen that before the pandemic.
How much do you internalize the criticism of YouTube's content? Do you take it personally? And how does that influence the decisions that you make as CEO?
I want to be doing the right thing. And I care about that. I care about the legacy that we leave. I care about the world that we leave to our children. I care about how media is consumed by the next generation and by everyone today. And so I really have put a lot of time and effort to make sure that we are acting responsibly. And there's always a balance between the free speech and the but being responsible and taking down content that we think could lead to some kind of real world harm. And so, sure, I think whenever you're in a position like that, there's going to be a lot of criticism. But our goal is just to continue to talk to experts and evolve.
And how do you make decisions in those tough moments where it's a tough call? How much of it is making a decision or leading by consensus, and how much does it come down to you?
The goal is that when we have tough decisions, they are improvising in some way. We've made a concrete set of decisions beforehand, and then we're looking and saying, is this something that meets our standards? Is it a violation or not a violation? And if it seems like there's some set of issues with the content that we have on the platform, we're going to go back to experts and then reevaluate. Should we be making changes to our policies?
YouTube helped keep a generation of children connected, educated, entertained, distracted through the pandemic. What have you learned from that experience, and what do you see as the potential future of YouTube as a tool for learning, as a tool in schools?
When I meet people and they find out I'm the CEO of YouTube, almost always they tell me about something they learned on YouTube or something their family member learned. So I see that as being a very significant part of YouTube. And during the pandemic, we certainly saw that a lot more education went online, and we had all the homeschooling. We had people who had to also just learn a lot of skills that they hadn't learned beforehand. But probably the biggest thing that we also learned was and that I really saw, was a need for us to continue to work with educational institutions, and the need for us to be able to integrate with some of the learning tools that the kids are all using, because they are using YouTube, and there's a lot more that we can do to really help educators have YouTube be a key part of the curriculum.
My kids are on YouTube a lot, and sometimes more than I want them to be, and sometimes it's super productive and they're learning something cool, and sometimes it's not productive at all. How are you innovating to make the time that kids spend on YouTube more valuable and, of course, safe?
It's very important to me as a parent to make sure that we're giving parents options about what they want their kids to see. And that's one of the reasons that pretty much as soon as I got to YouTube, we started working on YouTube Kids, which is a separate app, which is important for kids in terms of how we can control the quality, and we can give parents a lot more control about what kind of content is appropriate for them and their family. And there are many other things. We actually just came out with a supervised experience for tweens, because tweens was one of the age groups that was actually hardest. They usually don't want to be on the kids app, but they're not 13 to be on the main app, and so the supervised experience is something that we recently came out with.
The Wall Street Journal has been doing some in-depth reporting on Facebook. The report is that Facebook knew that Instagram was toxic for teen girls and didn't do anything about it. Does YouTube look at the impact it has on teen users, the influence it might have on someone's body image or self-esteem?
First of all, I think it's a very important topic, and we do have a panel of experts that we work with to be able to help us understand what are the different ways that our product could be used, or how do we face some of these challenging issues to make sure that we're getting the best advice. And we certainly do see, for a lot of really tough issues, that YouTube can be a really valuable resource. So body positivity, mental health, we see a lot of creators actually talk about mental health. And that for a lot of kids, it destigmatizes and enables people to talk about what's happening and what's going on with them.
The potential long-term impacts of YouTube on teens and on children, whether it is toxic or whether it's addictive, is that something that you wonder about? Is that something that you struggle with, not just as a CEO, but as a mom?
We certainly want to make sure that we are doing what we can to be responsible with kids and in every way possible. And that's one of the reasons that we actually have worked hard to give parents as many options as possible for them to decide what is important for them and their family, whether that's like limiting screen time, like limiting what is the content they actually have access to. I mean, even letting parents just say, these are like the 10 videos. My kid can only see these 10 videos. And so that is really important for us to give the tools back to parents for them to decide what is best for them and their family.
Are you concerned about looming regulation?
There may be regulation that is well-intended, but actually then has a really negative impact.
I would like to begin by addressing the heinous attack on the United States Capitol. Like all Americans, I am outraged by the violence, lawlessness, and mayhem.
How much did President Trump test YouTube, and how much did it test you as a leader?
Election integrity is something that we see is incredibly important, and we've leaned into in every way we possibly can. We treat all public figures and all public leaders the same as we treat any individual, and so meaning that everybody is held to the same standards. And so we definitely held President Trump as we would hold all other presidents and all other elected officials to the same standards that we hold our creators and anyone else on YouTube.
But was that difficult for you as the CEO of the company? I mean, that's like a big responsibility.
I mean, yeah, it is difficult, but it is very important, and we also are global, so we're dealing with leaders from all over the world, and there were a number of leaders and there continue to be a number of leaders that post or that there's content that may be a violation of our policies, but we do hold a consistent standard across everything that we do.
YouTube was the last platform to ban Trump, and you have said his channel will be reinstated when an elevated risk of violence has subsided. How and when specifically will you make that decision?
Well, we'll make that decision based on a number of different factors, whether that is like events in the news, signals we're seeing from the government, and we'll certainly continue to evaluate that based on a large number of signals that we see.
And will he ultimately be reinstated?
I mean, we've stated that we will reinstate him when we believe that there is no risk to public safety or no public danger.
Google just removed a voting app for Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny. Yeah. The Russian government seems to be stepping up requests to take down content. You've talked in the past about your family history, your grandparents living behind the Iron Curtain, being concerned about censorship back then. And Russia is a huge YouTube audience.
Yeah.
How concerned are you about Russian government overreach?
One of the things that is important to us at YouTube is the fact that we do enable so many voices and that we do enable people to express themselves and really celebrate the freedom of speech. And we certainly, that's a core value of ours. But when we work with governments, there are many things that we have to take in consideration, like whether it's like local laws or what's happening on the ground. And so there's always going to be multiple considerations that we're going to have to take into consideration.
Navalny said that YouTube deleted a video, one of his videos. Was that at the request of the Russian government?
We certainly get requests from governments, and we look and consider why are we getting the request, what's actually happening on the ground, and based on a whole bunch of different factors, we make a decision. So we don't always, those are not always requests that make sense for us to honor, but in certain cases, we will honor them in that country.
The Biden administration seems to be targeting big tech. We've seen Mark Zuckerberg, we've seen Jack Dorsey now testify before Congress multiple times, and I've heard it said that YouTube is getting a pass. Do you think you should be up there testifying?
Well, I think we do get a lot of scrutiny. I feel like there's a lot of scrutiny, and because YouTube is part of Google, Sundar has testified a number of different times and answered many different questions on YouTube. So I do believe there's a certain amount of scrutiny, and if I were ever asked to testify, I certainly would go and testify as well.
You're one of the most senior women at Google, if not the most senior woman at Google. Google has faced a lot of scrutiny for how it treats women in recent years. How much progress do you think Google has made in hiring and promoting women across the company? And how much progress do you think still needs to be made?
I see a really big effort across technology as a whole to be able to be more inclusive. And I think that is really positive. I've been a big supporter of it since the very beginning. And I mean, I think at Google, there are many efforts and there's a lot of work that has been done, and I'm sure there's a lot more for us to continue to do. And if you just look at the stats, you can see there are not enough women. We need more women in technology, and I think we have made a lot of progress, but it's still hard. It's hard to be. It's harder to be a woman in technology. It's harder to be a minority of any kind. And so I think there's still a lot of work for us to do.
When we last spoke 5 years ago, I asked you about being a mom. You have 5 kids, and you said something that really stuck with me. You said being a mom makes me a better leader. I prioritize better. I see something growing fast, and I run towards that. If something's growing closely, I'm like, I don't have time for that. How has that management strategy played out for you?
I think it's played out really well. I think it's been, prioritization is everything when you look at it, because we have a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of moving pieces, very dynamic environment. So if you can prioritize and say, these are like the most important things to do, then you're going to get there faster.
Larry and Sergey have now left. How long do you plan to keep running YouTube? How long do you plan to stay at Google?
As long as I have a mission that I believe in and things that I'm excited about getting done. So I have a lot of ways that I see that YouTube can continue to grow. I have a lot of products and ideas and things that aren't yet released and things that we aren't yet doing. And I'm excited about getting those done. So I think if there comes a time where I no longer have a list of projects, where I feel like I don't have that much more to add, then it'll be probably time to do something else.
Would you throw your hat into the ring to be Alphabet's next CEO? Or if the board asked you, would you step up and do that?
Well, I think Sundar's doing a great job. I'm very pleased. I think he's doing, it's a very challenging job. There's a lot of different constituents and a lot of product, a lot of different issues. And I'll just say I'll always do whatever would be wherever I could be most helpful to the company.
Do you still talk much to Larry and Sergey?
I do still see them socially, though, not work-wise.
Do you ever talk about work?
Sometimes maybe casually, but our business is very complex right now, and there's a lot of things that are happening, and so it's hard for. People may have different opinions, but to really engage, it's a long conversation.
What do you want your legacy to be?
I am proud of the way that we've been able to enable people to have a channel, to have an audience. Like I just met with a number of three creators, and like YouTube really was able to let them shine and create audiences in a business and employ people that otherwise never would have happened. And so that's certainly one, continuing to grow that. I'd say second, it's been really important to me too, to see a lot more women in technology. That has been just a personal goal of mine, is to be a role model and try to support women. And I feel very fortunate to have gotten to where I have, and I know it was due to many different factors. And I want to support the next generation of women and see technology as an open place where anyone can come and be successful. And then probably lastly, continue to grow what we're doing with education.
Susan Wojcicki, CEO of YouTube. Really great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East. Our top stories this morning.
We're going to need to do further rate increases, as we said, and we think that we'll need to hold policy at a restrictive level for a period of time.
Jay Powell sticks to his message that rates need to keep rising to quash inflation and calls the labour market extraordinarily strong following January's red-hot non-farm payrolls reading.
But President Biden insists the war against inflation is being won as he delivers his State of the Union address.
We're better positioned than any country on earth right now, but we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up.
Sources tell Bloomberg that some of Credit Suisse's junior and mid-level bankers will get their bonuses paid out in installments. We have the latest.
Turkey declares a 3-month state of emergency in areas struck by 2 massive earthquakes. That has a death toll in the country and neighboring Syria nears 8,000. It's gone at 9 a.m. across the Emirates. I'm Yusuf Gameddine in Dubai.
And I'm Manus Reddy right alongside you. Jay Powell had an opportunity to push back on the loushness of EFCON, but he didn't. And stocks only heard one word: disinflation, and no aggressive, hard knocking back at the EFCON conditions. This is what he did at the Brookings Institute in November. He missed the window. He missed the opportunity. Stocks rallied. We give ever such a slight amount back this morning on S&Ps. Citi's Mohammed Ababai says prepare for 6% from the Fed. 6%. That's way over where the soft ceiling of 5.1% is at the moment. Ababai says the fair value for SPOOs is down at 3,500. Don't forget the Nasdaq has rallied by 20% from its lows in the late autumn, and the shorts are mounting. Bank of America says investors are blindly buying the dips. Yusuf, you delivered the last headline on Turkey, the tragedy that is unfolding on a daily basis in front of our eyes. They have kept the market open. The circuit breakers were delivered. This is the performance in the Turkish market yesterday. The Capital Markets Board rolled back some of their precautionary measures. There is a state of emergency in Turkey, and the death toll rises. Equity markets at the moment are being crushed, down 10% almost yesterday. We're now in a bear market. Some of the key names, Turkish Airlines down 9%, along with one of the big auto car providers in Turkey down some 10%. We will, of course, track that, and we are live to Istanbul through the morning.
Yeah, we will continue to watch the currency as well, which has been a little bit more resilient compared to some of the other asset classes in Turkey. This is the state of play for government bonds in the United States. We are consolidating. We have the State of the Union to reflect on, but also, of course, the comments by the Fed Chair Jay Powell to analyze. In the front end, we saw quite a bit of repricing. US 10s at the moment at 364.73. It is all about the terminal rate. And I want to get to this chart. If we go for our clients, you talked a bit about this, Manus, but I want to build on it because it looks like it was a soft ceiling, what he said about the 5.1%. And he also looked like he was willing to follow the data and move higher if necessary. And then the Fed's Neil Kashkari chipped in on this as well. He says the strong jobs data shows that there's a need for more hikes. And as a result, the curve steepens. You have an $11 billion into blue chip bond sale that weighed on Treasury yields as well. I want to flip the board and get to the currency space. Another day, another moment for, well, anticipation for what we're going to get around the BOJ. The amount of commentary from government officials in Japan on everything related to the Bank of Japan has been nothing short of astounding. And it's getting a little bit too much. But the only thing that is missing is something that we can put our teeth into, and that is who is going to take over as the next Bank of Japan governor. The Markets Live team this morning writing that there's still going to be near-term churning for dollar yen. The Prime Minister just today saying that they're looking to make a choice that's going to take into consideration the effects of the market in making the selection, what's going to happen with yield curve control. But what is happening and where we have a major move is around basketball, Manus, because LeBron James has become the NBA all-time leading scorer, surpassing the record by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, which was 38,387. I mean, look, in high school, I played basketball. I sucked. They gave me the position of center because I was tall. But wow, this is a whole nother level, isn't it, Manus?
Well, the producer of this show, he's sitting back, he's got his cap on, he's a happy boy because, of course, this is his idol, LeBron James. It was the single biggest, most important thing. Never mind the red headlines on the RBI. James, of course, he's only one of 7 players scoring 30,000 points in his career. He's the youngest NBA in history to do it. 38 years of age, 30 points a game, and that's what you call victory. Is that GOT?
It looks like it. Pretty firmly so.
Or is that Greg, the producer of this show?
I think they're both now. Same level, yeah, in different ways.
Okay, let's crack on with these markets. Yvonne Mann is standing by in Hong Kong. Well, we'll see you and raise you, Yvonne Mann. You top that LeBron James. Good morning.
I can't. He's 38 years old. What else are we doing with our careers and lives, right? All right, all hats to LeBron James, of course. But again, when it comes to these markets, we're still digesting not just the Fed comments, but really the RBI in the last few minutes or so about what we heard from the Governor Das. You know, of course, raising those rates by 25 basis points, which was expected, but this was not a unanimous decision. And he mentioned about they had to continue on on the withdrawal of accommodation. Markets initially didn't quite like that news, especially saw that bit of a rattle in the bond market, but we're only just slightly higher in terms of yields in the India 10-year, 2 basis points higher at 733. The rupee not really moving too much, of course, but certainly still a lot of lingering questions on whether, when we're starting to talk about this dovish tilt by central banks, is the RBI quite there? He still mentioned about inflation heading around 4% above that target. So certainly that is still one thing we're dealing with. But in terms of Adani and the micro level, we are seeing some signs of easing when it comes to the group's assets here today. You've seen the likes of Adani Enterprises up some 8%. You have the likes of Oaktree, some of these distressed debt investors really snapping up these company bonds now here in Asia. So perhaps things are looking a little bit better. Moody's also saying when it comes to the India bank's exposure to the Adani group, it's not going to impact too much when it comes to their credit quality. So more positive signs when it comes to the Adani crisis. Flip of the boards, we're also watching this risk rally here in Asia on the back of those Fed comments. Menace, you said it correctly. He didn't push back. I think David Rubenstein teed him up many times about the market reaction, the loosening of financial conditions. He didn't take it. Markets take that as dovish. So you're seeing Asia Pacific higher here today. You're seeing a lot of gains when it comes to Taiwan, Korea, all punching about 1% higher. HS Tech, though, opposite direction. You're seeing the likes of Baidu, some of these AI, chat GPT rival stocks, certainly feeling a bit of, I guess, the heat was a little bit too much here. Tempering off, local media in China saying, look, be cautious about chasing this rally right now. Dollar pretty steady after those Fed comments, but we're still holding on to gains in yen as well as the Aussie. Menace.
Absolutely. Sometimes you only ever hear what it is that we want to hear when people give us a lecture. Yvonne, thank you very much. Yvonne Mann in Hong Kong. The President of the United States, Joe Biden, he used the State of the Union speech to tout America's economic strength. He insists that the US will not default over its debt limit and says inflation is finally coming down.
Inflation has been a global problem because the pandemic disrupted our supply chains, and Putin's unfair and brutal war in Ukraine disrupted energy supplies as well as food supplies, blocking all that grain in Ukraine. But we're better positioned than any country on earth right now. But we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up.
Well, Bruce Einhorn has been tracking the speech. There is a T-Live. Everybody can pick it up on the Bloomberg terminal. So, Bruce, I mean, there's various moments that the T-Live team have picked out. What stood out for you? Was it around perhaps the risk to the debt ceiling? That's what the markets were perhaps more focused on.
Yes, I agree with you. Ordinarily, when a president, his party doesn't control Congress, then there's not that much that one can hope is going to happen legislatively. So, for instance, now President Biden didn't really talk too much about a big legislative agenda because obviously Republicans control the House. There's not a whole lot that's going to get passed. So, on the one hand, he did talk a lot about everything that got passed in the previous Congress. As far as this Congress is concerned, the big focus is going to be on the debt ceiling. And there, the verdict is a little bit mixed when we come out of this speech because on the one hand, President Biden made appeals to bipartisanship. He began his speech by congratulating Kevin McCarthy, the new House Speaker. He also touted some of the bipartisan deals that were passed in the previous Congress. On the other hand, there was quite a lot of heckling of the president from members of Congress from the Republican side, which is not something that used to be common. At one point, President Biden talked about how there are some Republicans who want to cut Social Security, want to cut Medicare. That's something that got quite a reaction from a lot of the Republicans in the chamber. Again, some pretty heated interactions between the two sides. So I think that one takeaway that people will have today as they talk about the speech is that probably doesn't bode well for any sort of fast agreement when it comes to resolving the debt ceiling problem. The two sides do seem to be far apart, and as we saw in the reaction to the speech, there's quite a distance that will have to be traveled to get them to the same point.
Bruce, thank you for the valuable analysis. That's Bloomberg's Bruce Einhorn in Hong Kong. To our top story, Fed Chair Jay Powell is sticking to his message that interest rates need to keep rising to quash inflation. Speaking to Bloomberg TV contributor David Rubenstein, Powell said that the red-hot jobs market is a key focus.
We're just at the beginning of this process. The disinflationary process, the process of getting inflation down, has begun. It has a long way to go. These are the very early stages of disinflation. It's not going to be, we don't think, smooth. It's probably going to be bumpy. This process is likely to take quite a bit of time. My guess is it will take certainly into not just this year, but next year to get down close to 2%. We think that we're going to need to do further rate increases, keep rates at a restrictive level for a period of time. The base case is for me, is that it will take some time, and we'll have to do more rate increases, and then we'll have to look around and see whether we've done enough.
Let's get some more perspective. Joining us now is Jane Foley, the head of FX strategy at Rabobank. Jay, I mean, the Fed chair opened the door to a potentially higher peak rate in 2023 if the jobs market doesn't cool meaningfully. What do you think the peak rate is going to be this year, and how would that affect some of your calls?
Well, actually, we've just revised up our forecast for the peak rate on the back of really the combination of yesterday's speech, but also the payrolls report, and also these ongoing concerns that we have and many other economists have about the tightness of the labour market. So now we think the peak won't be 5.1, but it could be 5.5. So an additional amount of tightening in there. And I've got to say, you know, there's a lot of concerns about tight labour markets throughout most of the OECD. You know, we hear this in the UK, we hear this in Australia earlier in the week when they hiked interest rates. And if you look at countries like Mexico, where you might expect the US to draw in labour, well, you've got hikes in minimum wages there too. So there's going to be a lot of competition across the G10 economies for labour. Where is this labour going to come from?
But Jane, why then are markets not listening? Equity markets were lit up. You yourself referenced the Brookings Institute speech where you said he was clumsy. So the dollar has rolled down, equity markets lit up. Markets not listening to a soft ceiling of 5.1%, and it's not, nor is it countenancing really 5.5 and beyond.
You know, you're right. And I think you said it earlier on in the show, the market wants to hear what it said, and it heard one word, as you said, Manus, and that was the word disinflation. Now, of course, he went on to say that this is going to be a long and bumpy road. He said many hawkish things. And I think many economists are hearing those hawkish overtones here. But of course, the equity market, I think, wants to see something a bit more dovish in it. It's latching onto the fact that, yes, there's plenty of economic data out there in the US which suggests that manufacturing is slowing, maybe goods price inflation is slowing, supply chains are repairing. But the reality is that, yes, we have probably had peak inflation. And yes, headline inflation can come down further, but to try and get it back to 2% could be pretty tough when you have an environment where there's going to be wage price inflation because there's a shortage of labour. And that's quite unusual at this point of an economic cycle.
Jane, I know you got up early for the State of the Union address, and there's a lot to unpack. But from a fiscal sustainability point of view, from the point of view of committing to making sure the U.S. does not default on its debt, does that in any way affect your call on peak dollar this year?
Well, it could do, but, you know, I think the way the market tends to view this, the debt ceiling, it tends to dismiss it, and then suddenly, if this doesn't get repaired, then it will react. So I think for the time being, we're probably not going to see any reaction. The market's obviously going to be paying attention to what's going on, but I think this could be a delayed reaction.
Well, tell me this then, as far as dollar yen is concerned. Goldman's were here yesterday. They said it's going to be a ripple effect, 131. We've had a lot telegraphed to us. You know, we're getting ready for yield curve control being removed. I've heard a lot of that before. I mean, it was a fairly phlegmatic response to the hottest wages since 1997. Is the removal of yield curve control all priced in at 131?
I don't think it is. I think the market thought it was going to be removed, you know, a couple of months ago into December, etc. I think the market's learning a lot about the Bank of Japan, which of course Bank of Japan watchers have known all the time, which is this isn't a market that you can compare with Australia at all. The Japanese, the Bank of Japan, have been trying to nurture inflation, and they're beginning to see the green shoots of inflation. They do not want to shoot that down. And I think the other thing that the market is learning about the Bank of Japan, it's not that, oh, Kuruda's a dove and we're going to replace him and get somebody a bit more like the hawkish central bankers that we've been seeing in the rest of the G10. That's probably not going to happen. We're probably going to have him replaced with somebody who thinks along the same lines, probably somebody who's already from the Bank of Japan, who's been instrumental in the creation of many of these policies. Now, I think the new governor, like Kuroda, will be waiting for those green shoots, and only then will they start taking away some of the yield curve control policies. Now, that could happen. Like you said, we're seeing those green shoots coming through. We're waiting for the spring wage rounds, but there is a little bit of optimism around there. So I think a cautious approach to removing or adjusting yield curve control first is realistic, and I think that could still happen this spring.
Step one and step two. Jane, thank you very much. Jane Foley there, the head of FX strategy over at Rabobank. Thanks for your thoughts this morning on the markets. Let's get to the first word headlines from around the world to Doha and Simone Foxman.
Good morning, Manus. Turkey has declared a 3-month state of emergency in areas hit by 2 massive earthquakes. It gives government officials greater power in rescue and reconstruction efforts. Emergency teams are racing to save potentially thousands of victims still trapped after Monday's quakes. The number of people confirmed killed across Turkey and neighboring Syria is now approaching 8,000. The Pentagon says China refused a call from the U.S. to discuss the suspected spy balloon. A Defense Department spokesman says talks with China's defense minister were being sought, but the approach right after the balloon was shot down on Saturday was declined. The U.S. says the balloon was a surveillance device, while China says it was a weather monitoring device that blew off course. In the UK, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has reshuffled his cabinet after a rocky first 100 days in office. He's creating a new department focused on energy security and another to deal with science, innovation, and technology. Sunak's Conservative government trails the opposition Labour Party by around 20 points in opinion polls as voters grapple with a health services and cost of living crisis. And U.S. Secretary of Labor Marty Walsh is leaving the Biden administration. Bloomberg sources say he's been offered a job as executive director of the NHL Players Association, which represents professional hockey players in Canada and the U.S. Walsh is the first agency head in President Biden's cabinet to step down. Global News, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Simone Foxman, and this is Bloomberg. Yusuf.
That's quite the career shift. Thank you, Simone, for that. Let's get you a snapshot of what else is still to come on the show. Oil steadies after jumping the most in 3 months. That's an optimism that the Fed won't get too hawkish. We discuss that later. It's going to be with Columbia University's Christoph Ruhl.
First up, the latest on the Credit Suisse bonus saga. The bank is due to pay some of its junior and mid-level bankers in installments. More on the story on Bloomberg.
So what is the best investment advice anybody's ever given you?
You don't need to have a good idea every day. So there's times to be patient and there's time to press.
What do you think is the most common mistake that investors make, the average investor?
I think it's FOMO. So buy high, sell low. You know, and the amount of damage that does the average investor is big.
Let's suppose I have an extra $100,000. What would you say that person should do with $100,000? To put it in an index fund or something else like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the average investor, buying an index, but buying and holding and just letting it compound is really sensible advice. I think the more trading someone tries to do, the more damage they tend to do.
Why do the biggest names in business choose Bloomberg?
That is a great question.
It's a great question.
Great question.
Great question.
Best question I get all night.
Bloomberg, top experts, great questions.
On the David Rubenstein Show, peer-to-peer conversations, I uncover the untold stories of the world's most successful leaders.
Watch Wednesdays on Bloomberg Television.
Sources tell Bloomberg some of Credit Suisse's junior and mid-level bankers are going to get their bonuses paid out in installments. Finance editor Adam Haig joins us now with a little bit more on the story. It's not a car we're buying, is it? It's your career and your remuneration. I mean, this beggars belief. Take us through the details. What do we know?
Well, what we know is that Credit Suisse is having to get increasingly creative with the way that it's trying to retain its best people mass. I think that's one of the key takeaways. What we know is that junior level and mid-level bankers will essentially be given compensation in 3 installments throughout the year. So there's 3 dates, April 1st, July the 1st, and October 1st. 40 days after that, you'll receive the compensation into your bank account. And it shows the extent, really, that Credit Suisse obviously been through plenty of turmoil, plenty of scandals, with a lot of people having left the firm. They're trying really hard to get more creative in the way that they distribute the compensation to try and keep the best of their talent on bums on seats at Credit Suisse and stop even more of the good people leaving the Swiss bank.
The other front that's been interesting to watch is the risk controls front, because initially after a series of scandals, investors told Credit Suisse to improve those. Now there's pushback from Asia and specifically on the anti-money laundering front.
Yeah, so this story really is about kind of what the bank has done to dial back all of its risk exposure to get the house in order during the peak of the turmoil in the last few years. And what we're hearing now really is that essentially, some of that is being unwound. So, decisions that previously had to get sign-off from senior management, that now doesn't have to take place, and things like third-party transactions that needed to get those executive approvals, you're not going to require that as a manager at Credit Suisse anymore. So indeed, it is a kind of a winding back of some of this kind of risk control element that they've had in for a number of years now. And of course, it comes off the back of the Project Starlight project that was happening in Credit Suisse, which was around 2021, and their kind of big ambition to tighten controls to shore up confidence again, especially in its wealth units. And the anti-money laundering aspect of that is so huge from a confidence point of view. A lot of this speaks to the bank grappling with confidence, both on the customer side, but also from people within the bank who just...
We'll have to leave it there. A little bit tight for time, but still, thank you very much for weighing in on this. Excellent to get your context. That's Bloomberg Finance Editor Adam Haig. We still have much more to come on Daybreak Middle East. This is Bloomberg.
Amazon acquired Zoox back in January 2020 for what reports suggested was $1.2 billion. Since then, the company has revealed its Zoox vehicle. This is, I think, a rectangular passenger-focused vehicle with no driver's seat or steering wheel. How would you describe it?
We describe it as a purpose-built vehicle, but it's really a robotaxi. That's its purpose. And essentially, it's about transporting people from point A to point B on demand in the most effective, cleanest, and most enjoyable way.
So why won't you call it a car?
Because a car there's an inference that there is a driver. Whereas in our robotaxi, there is no manual driving. A human cannot really drive it to transport passengers. So we want to make sure that that mindset, that shift, that distinction is clear.
Let's get you the red headlines from the French heavyweight lender Société Générale. Your net income for the fourth quarter at 1.16 billion euros. That is much higher than the market had anticipated at 832.7 million euros. Going into this, it was all going to be about what the end of the tenure of the CEO, Frédéric Oudéa, is going to look like as he begins to prepare to hand over the loan loss provision at 413 million euros, which is a little bit lighter than what the market had been looking for, Manus.
Yeah, everybody's going to be focused on the thick number. We had the numbers from BNP Paribas yesterday, trouncing what Wall Street actually managed to deliver. The net income here for SocGen actually fell by 35% year on year. But Slavomir Krupa, we had him on in the second quarter when he talked about massive bonuses. So let's see what they've got to say. 440 million euros of a buyback program, and the loan losses, as you say, Yusuf, dropped.
Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.
Good morning, good morning. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome to Bloomberg Markets, trying to open.
This is Bloomberg Technology.
To our television and radio audiences worldwide, welcome now to Balance of Power. This is Bloomberg.
The complicity of the international finance institutions, including particularly Goldman Sachs, is there. Otherwise, one MDB wouldn't have happened. You can't just get away and by ignoring your moral responsibility. And I think Goldman Sachs should come out clean and deal with Malaysia.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, but let's start top stories this morning.
We're going to need to do further rate increases, as we said, and we think that we'll need to hold policy at a restrictive level for a period of time.
Jay Powell sticking to the message. Rates need to keep rising to quash inflation and calls the labour market extraordinarily strong following January's red-hot non-farms number.
But President Biden insists the war against inflation is being won as he delivers his State of the Union address.
We're better positioned than any country on earth right now, but we have more to do. But here at home, inflation is coming down. Here at home, gas prices are down $1.50 from their peak. Food inflation is coming down, not fast enough, but coming down. Inflation has fallen every month for the last 6 months, while take-home pay has gone up.
Sources tell Bloomberg that some of Credit Suisse's junior and mid-level bankers will get their bonuses paid out in installments. We have the latest.
Turkey declares a 3-month state of emergency in areas struck by 2 massive earthquakes. As the death toll in the country and neighboring Syria nears 8,000.
Let's just recap, Yusuf. We've had some breaking news headlines from Société Générale. Of course, this is all about FIC in the same way as Deutsche Bank, and they delivered ahead of the street's estimate, 577 million euros. The market was looking for 442. But according to the top line, they're missing their own payout pledge, and this is Frédéric Uday's final year in that seat. So you are looking at perhaps some of the issues coming to bear. They had to exit Russia last year. So we are just looking at a payout here in terms of the buyback at 440 million. That's just a little bit lighter, I think, than the market had anticipated yesterday. Just look at yesterday. We had BNP Paribas paying back 5 billion. Sorry, paying back 5 billion. Some of that was extraordinary, though, for them yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, Bloomberg Intelligence going into this, writing that they were looking at the capital plan as being key for this earnings announcement. I'm looking at the analyst rating breakdown, slightly bullish, 14 buys, 11 holds, 0 sells. Earnings day has always been big for the stock over the last 8 quarters. But the other thing that I'm asking, and that analysts are going to be asking as well, is what are you doing about cost control? And how are you factoring that in? Because operating expenses came in at 4.61 billion euros, which is higher than what the market had been looking for at 4.4 billion euros. How is the transition from the current CEO to the next CEO who's going to pick up the new tenure in May going to happen? This is a man who has become one of the most reputable bankers in the European financial scene, and there's a lot of pressure to keep up some of the momentum, especially at the tail end of his term.
Yeah, we saw Paribas raise their profit targets yesterday and indeed their cost targets yesterday in the delivery of their numbers. Let's see what Société Générale have got to say on that front as the morning rolls on. But for the moment, they're missing their own payout pledge in his final year, and that's going to be a little bit of a disappointment to Frédéric Uday. We'll get you the details on those. Trading in the equities business jumped 56% from a year earlier. That's way ahead of the average of the big boys and girls on the street in the US, up 28%. Okay. Let's turn our attention to the oil market. We romped it home yesterday, jumping the most in 3 months overnight, all on the optimism that the Fed will maintain its path on interest rate hikes without shifting to a more hawkish policy stance. Now, the fallout from the sanctions on Russian refined products and the impact of the trade flows are also being eased. Let's get to Christophe Roule, regular guest with a senior fellow at Columbia University Center for Global Energy Policy. 4% on the back of a dovish Powell. I make that a little bit of a leap of faith. Good morning, Christophe. What did you make of it?
Good morning. I make this a return within the band in which we're trading for a while now, say between 80 or a little below and a little below 90. And of course, they're carried by this very short-term financial sector sentiment. I think what's more interesting in terms of the upcoming sanctions on products, the embargo of the EU, is that it might have had a depressing effect on crude oil prices because of a limited capacity of Russia to store product exports and a limited willingness of refineries in India and China to take the products rather than the crude, which has contributed to the decline in January after crude was first trying to break the upper bound of this range in which it has been trading for a while now. I don't think that this is now the beginning of a new rally. I think it will just move within that range for a while.
Christoph, you've spent many years, of course, covering the energy flows around the world, and we get obsessed about Brent and WTI contracts for good reasons because of big volumes, but sort of under the index level and beyond that scope to some of the more distant crude levels and grades, where's the real tightness here? What are you seeing in the data?
What we are coming to now is, of course, there's a saturation with euros to some extent, which explains why the discount keeps on widening. But what we are coming to now is an adjustment process mostly for refined products, with the EU embargo having kicked in February 5. And what we will see is that even though this is a very moderate price cap again, which they have introduced for products just 2 months ago for crude, what we are likely to see is pressure on refining margins in some locations, with margins going up, helping these product exports to reorient themselves from Russia less into Europe, more into the Middle East, and some of it from the Middle East, I'm sure, back to Europe, and the rest into Asia. And as I said earlier, my suspicion is what we have seen is that on top of the saturation with euros in India, China, and to some extent Turkey, this may contribute to further pressure, because if Russia has limited storage capacity, if that part is true for refined products, we know little about it. That's why it's very little discussed. Then with the unwillingness of the big consumers to take refined products, they will refine less, and their refineries will run more idle to some extent, and they will compensate this by trying to export yet more crude oil, and that would put yet more pressure on the discount, and the discount tends to drag Brent with it with a little bit of a lag. So there's a lot of things going on oil markets, pure and simple, oil markets, sort of short-term fundamentals, if you will, these trade disruptions and the adjustments to them, which is very little to do with how the market perceives oil prices to be driven simply by the Fed and by China and by simply expectations. So you have to add these undercurrents, and then you get to a more moderate, so less excited view about oil prices in the future as far as an upward breakout is concerned.
I think oftentimes, unfortunately, Christoph, we don't want to look under the hood. We just want to, unfortunately, people want to go to the easy pickings, which is China and sanctions. But with that in mind, we have a whole host of bullish calls in terms of China consumption on jet fuel and oil, on a full reopening narrative. Join the fray, join Goldman Sachs, join the other houses in terms of what you think is realistic in terms of demand levels going into the third and fourth quarter in China on a full reopening narrative.
So it is true that if China is really taking off big time, that would have immediate, of course, effect on oil prices. But I've never been one of these big China bulls as of late. And when I look at the history of these forecasts and now the Chinese economic situation, I see only one scenario where this could really have a lasting, meaningful upward shift into oil prices, more than just a short-term blip. And that would be if China comes to the point where they decide to give themselves another huge stimulus, because the actual recovery of the economy from the lockdown isn't as grand as they were hoping it will be. And I think when we look at the Chinese economy, the signs are that it won't be as great as most people expect. And where I get suspicious is the oil market analysts focus only on this macro hope rather than on the oil market fundamentals as well.
You know what? I'm going to do you a favor, Christoph. I'm going to take you away from the macro world and just push you into the corporate earnings side of things, because BP smashed it out of the park with their results. You spent quite a few years doing work yourself for BP. Talk to me about how the company is going to live up to expectations that are, that have moved from here all the way up here now.